Welcome back to International Star Media, the Gold Star Standard, at the Gold Star Standard. Reactions, reviews, and news you can use. Once again, I am your host, International Yada, for the records and the dollars. And check it out. Y'all see from the title, not guilty. Sean Diddy Combs found not guilty on a few of the charges related to sex trafficking and racketeering. Let's jump straight off into this. This just in. Here we go. The Sean Diddy Combs verdict. Count 1, racketeering conspiracy, not guilty. Count 2, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, not guilty. And we told y'all about this time and time again. If you want to get away from the sex trafficking / human trafficking charges, you must be found not guilty of the elements: force, fraud, coercion, violence, and or threats of violence. And as you can see, he was found not guilty of count 2 of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. This count 2 right here could have landed him in prison for life. Okay, here we go. Count 3, transportation to engage in prostitution, found guilty. Count 4, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, once again found not guilty. Count 5, transportation to engage in prostitution, he was found guilty. So 2 out of the 5 charges he was found guilty of. The most serious charges, racketeering conspiracy and the sex trafficking charges, which could have landed him in federal prison for life, he was found not guilty of. Now, these charges that he was found guilty of, the transportation to engage in prostitution, let's get off into that to see exactly what that is. Transportation to engage in prostitution, which Sean Diddy Combs was found guilty for. Here we go. A charge of transportation to engage in prostitution refers to the act of knowingly transporting an individual across state or international lines with the intent that they engage in prostitution or other illegal sexual activity. This is a federal offense specifically outlined in 18 USC subsection 2421. A conviction can result in a prison sentence up to 10 years and or fines. So the charge that he was found guilty of could still result in a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. And that's the charge of count 3, transportation to engage in prostitution, and count 5, transportation to engage in prostitution. Let's take a deeper dive into this transportation to engage law. Okay, here we go. Federal law 18 USC subsection 2421. And I tell y'all time and time again how important it is to know what you're doing when you're doing what you're doing. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Okay, here we go. Federal law 18 USC subsection 2421. This law prohibits the transportation of individuals across state or international lines with the intent to engage them in prostitution or other criminal sexual activity. To be convicted, the prosecution must prove that the defendant knowingly transported someone across state or national lines, did so with the intent that that person engage in prostitution or other criminal sexual activity, and facilitated or participated in the transportation. So if you flew her out or you flew her in, you too could be found guilty of this. Okay, let's continue. Even if no illegal sexual activity takes place, the intent to force someone into prostitution during the transportation is sufficient for a conviction. Pay attention to this now. A conviction can result in up to 10 years of imprisonment and fines. So that's what this charge, transportation to engage in prostitution, is. Once again, we're going to go over this. A charge of transportation to engage in prostitution refers to the act of knowingly transporting an individual across state or international lines with the intent that they engage in prostitution or other illegal sexual activities. So this is what he was found guilty of in count 3 and also count 5 of the indictment. Transportation to engage in prostitution, which carries a 10-year maximum sentence. So it's a possibility that he could be released until sentencing due to the fact that the most serious charges was threw out. The most serious charges were dismissed. So that's a win for Sean Diddy Combs, his family, and his enterprise. Okay, let's get off into this news story and see what they had to say about it. Let's get this down. Okay, here we go.
You stand by. I also want to bring in our NBC News legal analyst, Kristen Gibbons-Fedden. Kristen, you have followed this one from the very beginning. I want to just update our viewers about what's going on inside court right now. His defense team, given the acquittals on some of these charges, Kristen, they're asking for him to be released. Because remember, he's been behind bars. He was facing such serious crimes, even though he had pled not guilty and maintained his innocence. He was behind bars this whole time, right? He has been in a detention center for months now. And so they're asking for him to be released today, for him to be able to live in Miami at his home. They've said, look, his plane has been sequestered. This is his first conviction. He should be released on appropriate conditions. Kristen, what are the chances he walks today?
I think there is a high likelihood that he walks today. Keep in mind what the jury found, right? The jury did not find him guilty of counts 2 and 4. So they really ripped out the threat element. They ripped out the violence element. They ripped out the violent parts of which is what the prosecutor.
I like to say he had a very strong defense team to get those charges of racketeering and sex trafficking throughout. Those were the most serious offenses. Those were the offenses that could have and would have sent Mr. Combs to prison for life. Okay? And those charges were dismissed. Let's continue.
Prosecution used as the main thing to keep him in bail. Remember back to when they were arguing bail multiple times because the defense asked for reconsideration. And some of the main things that they pointed to was how Diddy was violent, how Diddy kind of utilized his enterprise to enact all of these violence. Well, the jury has spoken. There was no criminal enterprise, or at least they did not find that Puff Daddy or Diddy made any of these crimes possible through his power, through his money, through his control, through his violence. So there is a high likelihood that with his plane sequestered, with him.
And another thing, by finding him not guilty proves that the accusers were, the sex trafficking charges was not sex trafficking, but consensual sex. That's what was proven today. That's what was proven in court, that it was consensual. Not force, not fraud, not coercion, violence, and or the threats of violence. But what they proved, his defense team, is that those things were consensual.
Being Miami, and the fact that he is a celebrity where he can't really go unnoticed, there is a high likelihood that the judge may have released him on bail today.
Yeah, I mean, they have his passport, but he has an enormous amount of means, and obviously the prosecution is going to oppose this. They're saying that his attorneys have been trying to downplay this years-long conduct. But Misty, if you're the judge in this moment right now, do you release him with the sort of hope in the prayer that he's not going to be able to fly out of the country somewhere?
I think it's very likely that he gets released now that he's convicted on these Mann Act charges, and that's it. You're not talking about the sex trafficking, force, fraud, and coercion. You're not talking about RICO, this widespread criminal enterprise. You're talking about two isolated Mann Act charges, and the analysis is going to be, number one, danger to the public. The other is going to be flight risk. So flight risk is what you're speaking of. To the extent that there's enough conditions on him to keep him and have him come back for sentencing, I think it's very likely that he gets released. And when he gets sentenced, this is really important, because what's going to happen is the prosecutors are going to present aggravating factors. The defense is going to present mitigating factors.
We should make that clear. That does not happen today. That happens in months from now.
That happens down there. But the fact that sex trafficking is an acquittal, it's going to be really important, because that idea of who's exploited in these Mann Act charges, that Cassie Ventura or Jane were potentially exploited, that would be the prosecution's argument. I think you're going to lose a lot of that argument. So the judge is going to be looking at that possible penalty and likely saying that he will be released with those conditions. And one more point on that sex trafficking. I think the defense made a very good point, which the prosecution really had to concede. And when we say it's easier to convict if it's only sex trafficking at least one time, it's also a concession to a certain degree, because when do you decide it's sex trafficking versus not sex trafficking? And a lot of people have this idea of what that is, right? That it's something more than just one isolated incident, that it's more of a large scale operation. And I'm wondering if that undercut the prosecution's
I think people
case.
also think of it as something that not for the benefit of the person themselves,
Correct.
right? They think about people selling girls. They think about some international operation, people in the back of a van. People have an image of sex trafficking that doesn't necessarily correlate with what the law says about sex trafficking, but I wonder if it played into the jury's view of what was going on here, because the defense kept hammering, look, he might be a flawed guy. He might be violent. He might be an abuser, but he's not a trafficker. He's not part of an enterprise.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, even to the extent that Mark Agnifilo and
It's so important not to get caught up in this, not to get caught up in the charges of sex trafficking / human trafficking, and to have to fight for your life while they try to prove force, fraud, coercion, violence, and or the threats of violence. This man has some high-powered attorneys to help him fight and beat this. This charge is no joke. Let's get back into this.
his closing referenced Sammy the Bull. It's like they wanted the jury to go home and rent Goodfellas so that they could see what a criminal enterprise was. And I agree with you. I think that just in the jury's mind, and the average person, you're going to think of a more widespread scheme where there's a lot of exploitation of women being coerced to come into a sex trafficking ring. That's not what this was. So clearly the defense did a good job undercutting it. And Laura, also, defense strategy of not calling any witnesses, people have said, was that good or that bad?
A lot of people wondered, is that a concession that he doesn't have a strong case? And now look what happened.
Well, it's a risk-averse strategy, in my view, because once you start putting on witnesses, you open up doors. And the defense did a very good job on cross-examination of using electronic record, text messages, emails, social media posts. You can't really wiggle out of them. They're in black and white. So if the jury reads those as being romantic relationships,
I want to stop that right there, because she's talking about social media posts. You can't really wriggle or wiggle out of them. Whatever you post on social media can and will be used against you in a court of law and or an investigation that they have against you. Pay attention. Whatever you post on your social media accounts, if there is a criminal investigation against you, whatever you post can and will be used against you in a court of law. I suggest that you check out the video right before this one. Check it out. It's about social media posts. Take this back a second. Let's go.
Using electronic record, text messages, emails, social media posts. You can't really wiggle out of them. They're in black and white. So if the jury reads those as being romantic relationships, consenting relationships, whatever that might be, you know, when with respect to forced labor, that there were relationships between him and his employees that didn't rise to that level of force and coercion, that's really effective because that goes back in time to when it's happening. It's not what you're thinking in retrospect from the stand.
Just to bring everyone inside the courtroom again, no cameras in federal court, but we have a crackerjack team inside there that is sort of feeding us through the Pony Express of notes here. And the prosecution is fighting desperately right now to keep him behind bars, saying things like he poses a danger, he's going to attempt to flee justice, basically saying, Misty, he can't be trusted because of the misconduct, because of the physical abuse. He doesn't have a respect for the law. This is, again, the Comey, the prosecutor, trying to convince the judge to keep him behind bars. And the judge is pressing her, saying, counsel, do you have an example of somebody who has been behind bars in detention on this type of charge, this prostitution Mann Act charge, and bail was denied on those grounds? And she said, I don't have an example off the top of my head, Judge. And it sounds like he's gonna make her, press her to try to find some precedent, if you will, because the judge has to be careful too, right? He can't keep him in detention if there's not a legal justification for it.
Absolutely. The judge relies on legal precedent. Is there another similar case in this jurisdiction where that's happened? I am not aware of one. I think prosecution's argument about that
So with this conversation, this argument going on sounds like Diddy will be released while he is awaiting sentencing. Hopefully that is the case, since the man was found not guilty of racketeering and sex trafficking. Let's go.
Danger element is much weaker given what the jury has said. The jury has spoken. These acquittals, they are rock solid. Nothing can happen on those particular charges at this point. The stronger argument, in my view, from prosecution perspective, is the tremendous amount of resources that this individual has on that flight risk issue. I think it's a stretch to say, given the jury's verdict, that this is a danger to society because the jury has made this determination on these charges. And again, unless there's a case out there that I'm not aware of, I practice in this jurisdiction. I don't think there is on these.
You've never
charges.
Seen that before in your practice?
No.
Yeah.
And by the way, Laura, he's a first-time offender. You know, we know a lot about him because he's in the public eye for past 20 years, but he's a first-time offender from a legal perspective. And that has an impact on this decision as well.
Hey, there we have it. Found guilty on 2 of the 5 charges, not guilty on 3, the most serious charges. International Star Media, the Gold Star Standard, at the Gold Star Standard. Reactions, reviews, and news you can use. Once again, I am your host, International Yada, for the records and the dollars. And we will see you on the next one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share. And once again, shout out to everybody that has already subscribed.